to have the band back together today. It is our 27th episode, the beginning of season 2, and we are joined by Lauren Blanchard, who is an Africa specialist at the Congressional Research Service, Damola Dumasoma, who is a writer at okafrica.com, and I don't think my guest needs any explanation, but is Honorable Robert Chagulani, also known as Bobiwine. Bobby, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Bobby, last time we talked, a year ago, you had come to the United States because you had been detained by the Ugandan authorities and beaten, and you were getting medical detention. And we talked, the four of us, about your life story and why you entered politics. But a lot has happened in 1 year. And in particular, you announced that you were running for president. And so I was hoping you could catch us up. When we talked last time, you were recovering, you were committed to a new future in Uganda, but you hadn't made the leap to run for president. What has changed?
Well, a lot has changed, but I would love, in very brief words, to remind us of what has been happening, what continues to be happening. As a musician, I'd been talking about the injustices and the government excesses and what is being done wrong and what we could do right. And that explains why I went to Parliament to address these issues, to raise them on a more formal platform. Now, having been attacked by the president and the military and brutalized, still I did not break my resolve, because I know that the problem with Uganda is the governance, which is centralized in one man's hand, President Museveni. My team and I decided to run against him and change that forever, once and for all, in a vote. And that explains why we are running on behalf of the people of Uganda to change the status quo and to put President Museveni out of governance.
You have got an uphill battle. There's been a number of opposition leaders before who have tried to run and defeat President Museveni. And so I thought Damola and Lauren and I could ask a couple questions to kind of understand how you think and you are planning to outmaneuver President Museveni and win this election in 2021. Damola, can I turn to you first?
Yes, definitely. So I think once you announced your presidency, everyone sort of rallied behind you because this is an exciting movement. But I think it's important to discuss the how. So I'm wondering if you can tell us more about your strategy, and do you feel that you have the network and the ground game necessary to actually win the election?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. Initially, we had an effort of bringing, first of all, sensitizing the people of Uganda to understand the problem, but most importantly, to understand how to go about the problem. We agreed, all of us unanimously, that we need unity. Unity from different political parties, unity from people from different walks of life, and unity among the people of Uganda, those that are living in the country and those that live in the diaspora. We managed to achieve all that. So our strategy is one, to massively sensitize our people, get them ready for a vote, the same people that have been kept apathetic, create and promote the belief and confidence in democracy. Then all of a sudden we'll go into the election in a massive way. That is what we're preparing to do. That is what we hope to achieve, to get all the people of Uganda stand and speak with one voice through their vote. And how to move from there is to sensitize the people on how to protect their vote, on how to get involved in not only casting the vote, but to take part in the counting of the vote until the final and realistic result is announced.
Can I ask, just to follow up to Damola's question, does People Power need to be registered as a party? How do you think about the FDC, the DP, the other parties? Are you looking for formal coalitions with them, or just a decision to support each other?
Yeah.
Is it too early?
Yeah, even if Uganda is seen as, is on paper, a multi-party democracy, in reality it's not a multi-party democracy, but a military dictatorship, because no single political party is allowed to organize. Just a few days ago, the main opposition, the leader, the former presidential candidate of the main opposition party, the FDC, was brutalized by the police. He almost lost his life, and that's exactly what has been going on. No single party is allowed to organize. So we resolved, as the People Power movement, to be the uniting force. So we are not a political party, but you are a uniting platform for all political parties and all change-seeking forces. And we continue to bring them together. Already we are united, but again we are continuing to build synergies with the FTCs and other change-seeking individuals, so that we go into this as a united front, as the people of Uganda, not just as political entities.
Bobby, you mentioned the use of violence by security forces, and that's been pretty well documented. You, of course, were on the receiving end of it back in 2018. How do you plan to deal with that as the elections are approaching? You mentioned the water cannon, use of a water cannon against Csis last week. You know, when you were detained and abused, and your colleagues, that was in the context of a political campaign. So how are you thinking about approaching this, and in terms of keeping your supporters safe as well?
First and foremost, we have a two-pronged approach. We have a local approach and an international approach. Locally, we try to guide our people not to fall in the trap or to fall in the advantaged areas of the regime, because the regime is equipped to use and unleash violence at any time. So we try to use the non-conventional ways. We're glad that the biggest part of our population are young people, and yes, we use informal ways like music, skits to communicate, and we also use the internet. So we don't present ourselves where they can brutalize us, but we still know that they can brutalize and continue to brutalize people anyway. And that explains why we are constantly reaching out to the development partners like the United States, the European Union, to help us hold our government accountable, well knowing that especially the United States is a very big sponsor of our military, and we know that the United States is a democracy that is governed on the rule of law. So we have been in the past calling upon them to invoke their laws like the Magnitsky, which I am thankful and indeed deliver thanks on behalf of the people of Uganda, because recently the former Inspector General of Police, Kale Kaihura, has actually been indicted, and he has been denied visa entry to the United States. And not only him, but other human rights abusers. That in a way has sent a very strong message to the abusers of human rights, those that torture people and brutalize them. And it has in a way not only controlled or checked them, but it has empowered the people of Uganda to put their feet down and stand for their rights, well knowing that those people that take part in their torture and brutalization will actually be sanctioned.
You know, press reports have suggested that the government has been monitoring your communications through WhatsApp and social media. I'm assuming that you guys are sort of constantly trying to figure out how to adapt to deal with that.
Yeah, that's very true. So we are supposed to be disheartened with it, but again, we also are glad to know that we are dealing. We have an old man and a young man tussling out in a young generation style. In this generation where we have different apps, different modes of communication, all we have to do is try to go around it and to try to put it so much in our youthful style that cannot be controlled. We know that the regime has invested so much in tapping and infiltrating the communication, but again, we just have to keep evolving, keep inventing new forms of communications that are able to go around all the curtailment.
You know, I follow Uganda closely here in Washington, and I have to tell you, Bobby, I can't figure out what is your status, right? You still sometimes vote in Parliament, you travel sometimes, no concerts. How do you even keep track of it? It just seems like the government's restrictions around your movement and what you can do change day to day. How do you navigate really sort of an inconsistent approach to your status? You're still under treason charges as well, right? How do you manage to run a campaign with so much uncertainty that hangs over you?
Well, on top of the treason charge, I was recently charged with annoying the president. So charges in Uganda just keep coming. They don't have to be, in our law books, because it is not a rule of law. And indeed, whatever happens does not mean, our curtailment does not necessarily have to be out of breaking any law. It has to just be as per the interest. This and more is supposed to be a challenge, but for us, it is a window of opportunity because we're dealing with a failing state that has no control and has no structured operation whatsoever. The more they target me, is the more my other colleagues are able to maneuver unchecked. And we also know, most importantly, that much as the leadership of the regime is bent on curtailing and stopping us, even people working within the regime actually are hungry for change. So it is those security officers, it is those police officers, those military officers that are within the regime that actually many times help us go about it. That explains how I'm supposed to pass by the national airport without being caught. It is until I'm already airborne or already out of the country that the regime knows that I'm actually out of the country. So it is a cat and mouse game, really, with us and the regime. I could be able to move out of my house if I don't announce, but if I tweet that I'm going to attend a church function or I'm going to attend a wedding, I will find that church surrounded or that wedding surrounded by the military. So it's more or less a Tom and Jerry game.
Tom and Jerry game. I have one more question, but Damola, do you have another question for Bobby?
Yeah, I know that you mentioned it's sort of a Tom and Jerry game, and that some of the charges against you are like ridiculous and sort of bizarre. But I also want to talk about fear, and do you have it? Because Museveni will, as you said, is willing to unleash violence at any turn, and you present one of like the biggest oppositions to his leadership that he's seen in years. So there's a real threat out there to you. So I want to know, on a personal level, how do you deal with fear? Is it something that registers in your mind?
I would be dishonest if I say I don't have fear, or if I say fear does not register. I mean, people always get killed. My driver was shot dead and the target was me. And not only that, recently my fellow musician called Bobiwine was abducted. He disappeared only to show up after his eye has been plugged out, and indeed he also died. Recently, one of our lady leaders was abducted, and horrible things happened to her. So much happened to the people, and I believe that the whole intention is to create so much fear. So there is fear out there, but being a leader, I have to fight that fear by first of all pretending that I'm not scared, because that alone gives people confidence. And somehow I've realized that by pretending to be brave, sometimes one ends up being actually brave, because that's the only way to go about it. So that's basically how we keep going. But again, another thing is I'm glad that I have the ability to address the international community, have the ability to be heard, have the ability to attract not only the national but the international attention on me on behalf of the people. And that explains why every opportunity I get, I try as much as possible to highlight the plight of the people back home, well knowing that the dictatorship back home is only scared of one thing: international attention. So that's what we capitalize so much on.
That's a great transition to the last question I wanted to ask you, Bobby. So you mentioned the key role of the international community. You mentioned a Global Magnitsky Act, which can use to target corrupt officials, the recent sanctions on the former police commissioner. But there probably is a risk as well as painting you as the man of the West. Yeah. And so how can you help our listeners understand the balance that you're in? What is the role that the international can do to be helpful, to level the playing field, which is what I think everyone wants, is so that candidates can compete fairly and without harm, but doing it in a way that doesn't give your opponents the opportunity to cast you as a man for the international community, not for Ugandans. Is there a balance? Is there a risk, or is that not an issue?
In my opinion, it is not an issue because, first and foremost, President Museveni has been president for 34 years. When President Museveni was my age, he was globe-trotting all over the world to make his case against what he called the dictatorship back then in Uganda. What I'm saying is exactly what he said. He is quoted to have said that the problem of Africa and Uganda in particular are the leaders that overstand power. Sadly, 34 years later, he does not want anybody to remind him of what he said back then. So that is not our issue because the people of Uganda understand. The people of Uganda know that it's only when we highlight their plight to the international community that the regime in Uganda will not be oppressing them in the dark. So that does not worry us in any way. In any case, we know that as Uganda, we are part of the global community. We are signatory to very many agreements, and we promise to adhere to the values, especially the rule of law, democracy, and human rights, which we share internationally. And these are the values, these are the ideas that we front. So we are not worried about it. I must note that yes, it's true that President Museveni has tried so much to project us as projects of the West. He was quoted recently claiming that people power is an idea that is being paid for by the West and is being sponsored to promote homosexuality in Uganda and everything. Well, he has said all that, but again, it is also known that we cannot divorce ourselves from the international community. We continue to request the international community to hold the leadership of Uganda accountable and make respect for human rights, democracy, and leveling the playing field as preconditions for cooperation. If we achieve that, if we achieve a fairly leveled playing field, we know that that would be the master stroke for the people of Uganda to have their voice reign supreme.
Thank you so much, Bobiwine, for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me.